She assumed you'd orbit her forever, trapped in the gravity of what once was. She believed your heart would remain anchored in confusion, frantically grasping for a ghost, mistaking presence for power and proximity for proof. But she underestimated something most do: a man's capacity to evolve in silence. At first, you were available, loyal, transparent, not because you were weak, but because you were invested. You showed up not with flashy gestures or performative displays, but with a steadiness that few understand in a world addicted to volatility. And when she retreated, subtly, at first less engaged, less curious, less emotionally reachably, didn't react immediately. You gave her space, thinking it was temporary, a phase, a passing storm. But days became distance, and distance became doubt. You noticed how her eyes no longer stayed, how her responses felt rehearsed, how presence became obligation. She didn't leave, not physically, but emotionally. She began to ghost you in plain sight. Still, you waited, not because you lacked options, but because you valued depth. You honored the connection. You believed in endurance. And that's when the real test began. One of life's most unspoken trials isn't betrayal, it's erosion. Not the knife in the back, but the quiet disappearance of affection. You kept showing up, not for validation, but because it was your nature. Because strength, to you, wasn't about dominance, it was about integrity. But she began to treat your consistency as a given, your emotional transparency as a weakness, your loyalty as a leash she could loosen or tighten at will. And slowly, your kindness became invisible. The tragedy wasn't that she changed, was that you allowed yourself to remain unchanged for too long in the face of neglect. But then something rare happened. You didn't lash out. You didn't plead. You didn't self-destruct. You paused. Not out of confusion, but clarity. You looked in the mirror and saw the quiet erosion of your self-respect. And for the first time, not in anger, not in ego, you chose to stop showing up for someone who had stopped seeing you. You didn't need a grand speech, no ultimatums, no door-slamming drama. You left in the most powerful way imaginable, in peace. You didn't even announce it. You simply stopped explaining your worth, stopped translating your heart, stopped performing emotional labor for someone who had clocked out months ago. You didn't seek closure, you became it. And that's when everything changed. Because your silence wasn't passive, it wasn't avoidance, it was an act of internal revolution. A man doesn't disappear because he's broken. He disappears because he has been rebuilt. And she noticed, not immediately. At first, she mistook your absence for weakness. She assumed you'd spiral, send late-night monologues, try to reclaim lost ground. But there were no texts, no stories, posted for attention, no emotional breadcrumbs. There was only stillness, and in that void something unexpected happened. She began to notice the absence of something she never fully appreciated when it was present: your emotional gravity, your ability to stay when others fled, your energy, your depth, your masculine steadiness. She began scrolling not through your photos, but through her memory, noticing the way you once looked at her, the calm in your voice, the way you didn't try to fix her, you simply held space. And that's when regret wasn't the right word anymore. What she felt wasn't loss, it was irrelevant. Because what hurts isn't always heartbreak. Sometimes it's realizing you no longer hold the emotional monopoly you once thought was guaranteed. It's realizing that your opinion no longer shapes the man you left behind. That he doesn't just survive without you, he thrives. Not out of revenge, but out of realignment. She remembers you, but not as you were. She remembers you as a standard, as a reference point, as the one who didn't chase, didn't fold, didn't sacrifice his center just to be chosen. And that, paradoxically, is why you became unforgettable. Because most men panic when dismissed. They beg, they explain, they spiral. But you transcended the equation entirely. So how do you embody this in your own life? How do you stop being a casualty of romantic chaos and start becoming the architect of your emotional world? It begins with 5 essential shifts. First, from reaction to response. When she withdrew, the instinct was to chase, to restore what was. But reaction is the language of fear. Response, however, is the posture of wisdom. The Stoics taught us that emotional freedom is born when we stop needing to be understood and start understanding ourselves. You didn't respond to her silence with noise, you responded with stillness, not to confuse her, but to return to you. Second, from need to wholeness. You once believed love required proof demonstrations of worth, consistency without reciprocity. But now you understand, affection should never be a form of self-abandonment. She thought your presence was loyalty. She didn't realize it was a choice. And when a man remembers his choice, he becomes sovereign. You are not a half waiting to be completed. You are a whole, choosing to be generous with your energy, never desperate with it. Third, from confusion to clarity. The discipline of detachment. Detachment isn't apathy. It's understanding that peace isn't found in control. It's found in the refusal to be controlled. You stopped decoding her mood swings. You stopped seeking signs. You stopped weaponizing hope. You made peace with not knowing, and that peace became power. Fourth, from external legacy to internal monument. Most men collapse because they center their lives around a woman's presence instead of anchoring in their own mission. But your peace, it began when you remembered why you were here. Your discipline, your ambition, your crafties became your compass, not to attract her back, but to build something she could never again access. Fifth, from performance to essence. You no longer wear masks. You no longer play roles. Your value isn't in how much you impress it, in how deeply you inhabit your truth. You don't ask, will she return? You ask, am I walking the path I was forged to walk? And that shift from pursuit to presence is what Stoicism has always pointed toward. The irony, now that you're gone, truly gone, not in bitterness, but in rebirth, she sees it. Not immediately, it trickles in the quiet, in the moments of contrast. When another man speaks, and she notices the lack of gravity in his words. When another smile feels performative instead of rooted. When presence feels like pressure instead of peace. She begins to compare not you, but the standard your silence left behind. The man who didn't explode, the man who didn't collapse, the man who simply left with grace. And it haunts her, not because you punished her, but because you didn't. Because the man who doesn't need closure is the man who has found truth, and truth lingers long after affection fades. You didn't transform to impress her. You transformed to stop betraying yourself. Your gym sessions, they're no longer fueled by anger, their devotion to discipline. Your work, no longer a distraction but an altar. Your solitude, no longer loneliness but liberation. You no longer orbit her story. You author your own. She may try to return, not because she loves you anew, but because the void became too loud. But now you see clearly. The woman who once held your presence lightly does not deserve the weight of your future. You're not bitter. You're not angry. You're simply elsewhere. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually. Not unreachable out of spite. Unreachable because you outgrew the smallness of her perception. A woman may forget your compliments. She may forget the dates, the shared playlists, the morning texts. But she never forgets the day your energy disappeared. She never forgets the moment you stopped explaining. She never forgets the silence, because that silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything she once ignored. Your consistency, your masculine calm, and now that silence follows her not as punishment, but as proof that a man's value does not come from how long he stays, but from the courage it takes to leave when staying means losing himself. You didn't lose her. She lost herself in trying to test a man who wasn't playing games. And when she finally realizes it, when the crowd quiets, when the distractions fade, she remember, not the version of you she manipulated, but the version she never got to meet, the man you became after you let go. And that version, he doesn't wait, he doesn't beg, he doesn't return, he becomes.